I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until.
Hello and a warm welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. When I travelled to Luge on the 12-year anniversary of the Madeleine MCCANN case, I just finished my 4th book on the case, and that book, Deep into Darkness, ends with a person holding Madeleine in his arms, standing in front of the door of the apartment of 5A. And the question really was, what happens after this? What happens next? And so my mission in going to Luz was really about that question, dealing with the reality of what really happened after that. So do you see, my mission in going to Luz was to test out a combination of Detective Amaral's theory, also trying to reconcile witness statements. We'll get to those later on in this particular analysis, as well as some of my own intuitions. I had an idea when, where and how Amaral's simulated abduction could have occurred on paper. Now I wanted to see if I could pull it off without running, without being seen, within a target time frame, and then all of that together without being obviously exhausted by the effort. So yes, juggling quite a few eggs at the same time. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Welcome to the hundreds, I think maybe a couple of thousand of you. Welcome to the channel. Bear in mind, I'm going to be doing a live stream look at the Doulos murder trial, the murder of Jennifer Doulos. She was only just pronounced dead yesterday, and now the husband's mistress is on trial for her murder. I'll be jumping onto that immediately after this episode. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So number one, 15 minutes. I chose 15 minutes because that was the time period individuals seemed to disappear for their so-called checks. I wasn't interested so much in the who of it as much as the when and the how of it, and also to some extent the where. My goal was to use the closed door of apartment 5A as a kind of starting line to walk under the overhang of the apartments in a westerly direction, in other words, in the opposite direction to Robert Murat's house, or the falsely imputed Tannerman, the direction that he was walking in. And so to cross the road, head down to the coast, be at the Smith siding by or around or just before 10 p.m., reach the disposal site and be back at the tapas bar as close to 10 p.m. when Kate McCann raised the alarm as possible, and to arrive back without breathing heavily or perspiring. On paper, it was clear that it would take longer than 15 minutes to go from apartment A to 5A to the Smith siding, and a little beyond that to the coast and back to 5A. It would also be cutting it extremely fine to return to the tapas bar, passing Batista supermarket at the bottom, and then walking up to and entering via the common east entrance. So how did I do it? Well, I took this photo on May 3rd, 2019, on the lead up to the apartment at 21:45. I left the door of apartment 5A at 21:48, and I was back at the Ocean Club by 22:02. That's a 14 minutes round trip. And that's 14 minutes on the low end. The 01 had just turned to 02 when I stopped my watch. So it took around about 9 minutes to get from 5A to the stormwater drain, and then just 6 minutes to get back to the Ocean Club from that point. So how did I do that? Number 2, tennis court, rear gate. If you imagine the Ocean Club complex as a sort of puffed up number 6, except facing the other way, the 6 is facing to the left rather than to the right, then 5A is on the very edge of the 6's belly on the left side, lower belly on the left side, and the rear gate of the tennis court is almost on the opposite side of the tail, diagonally and in terms of where the coast is. And this led to the second insight. It was possible to get from 5A to what I identified as a candidate temporary disposal site via the Smith siding and back to the tapas bar in less than 15 minutes, walking, if I return via a different route, entering through the back entrance gate of the tennis courts. At this point, I noted down a question for Detective Amaral. Was the gate locked at the time? There is a fairly low perimeter wall around the south side. The shadowy figure may have used dumpsters or a parked car to step up the wall if the gate was locked, or if he was quite athletic, parkour his way up and over the wall. I also felt I could not have done the simulation successfully if I had tried it on my first day in Luz. I would need a few days to become familiar with the terrain, with some of the alleyways, get to know the configuration of the hotel, and learn, to some extent, just the layout of the town. Number 3, stormwater drain. The distance from the candidate temporary disposal site to the rear gate of the tennis court was barely 500 meters, and it took a smidgen over 5 minutes to walk in a series of zigzags. Obviously, integral to the simulation was the aspect I had no control over, but neither would the imputed abductor, and that was people walking or driving by. I was surprised and impressed that I was able to walk to and from my destination for 14 minutes without being seen by anyone, and that was besides a single encounter, a kind of a surprising encounter in an alley. Ironically, the very same alley where the Smith sighting took place. Only a single vehicle passed me in the streets a little way around the corner from that. Number 4, steep slopes. Although you can see Luz is situated on a slope on a hillside, you can't really appreciate the true steepness of the topography unless you're there, unless you actually walk it. I do think these steep slopes are the reason why the group didn't use the creche facilities. You really do feel it in your calves and in your legs. And they felt that it was too far and too exhausting to walk for little children, but it's also kind of quite difficult as an adult to have to walk that way repeatedly. And so I do think if the terrain had been flatter, they likely, in my opinion, would have come to a different decision in terms of how to deal with the kids. You might think that the slopes and steepness is irrelevant to this case, but if you pay attention to the letter of the witness statements, it's very integral to what they saw. And what's more, plays into the pace of the man they saw walking. It goes without saying that you can move quite quickly walking downhill, carrying a child, where it's a steep slope and you can allow the force of gravity to assist you. It was a lot harder getting back to the Ocean Club walking uphill from the coast, but if you shortened the route and did it in a series of zigzags, you could walk upwards and then sideways without really breaking a sweat. The important thing to note is that the witnesses didn't see the man running. He did seem to be walking quickly, which is hard not to do when you're going down a steep slope. Some excerpts from the statements from the witnesses who saw a man carrying a child. They said that his gait was normal between a fast walk and a run. He didn't look tired. He seemed to be moving in a normal manner. And some put the time of the sighting as between 21:50 and 10 o'clock. Number 5, line of sight, Roja Negra versus the west side. Now, Tenneman seemed to be heading to the east of the apartment complex, and Kate McCann's book seems to draw one's attention to the ominous bulk of the Roja Negra, which is on the east side. I think somewhere in her book she even refers to someone thinking that they saw car lights on that mountain somewhere on the bulk or heading to the bulk. Now, I walked up this mountain myself. It was an area that the McCanns were often seen jogging on or towards. Although it's not populated, it's a popular walk for hikers, joggers, and tourists. What's more, from the top you have a very clear view of the entire beach and the entire slope of the mountain below. It's for this reason, because it's so exposed, it doesn't make sense to bring anyone here or anyone or anywhere near it. If you're trying to do something in secret, you're going to be seen from miles away. The west side, by comparison, is not only more accessible, it's far less touristy. It's wilder, the terrain is wilder, it's filled with wells, stormwater drains, and a very irregular kind of hostile coastline. It's a coastline that's not really conducive to swimming. A few dog walkers and joggers visit this side. It's flat, it's quite a pleasant walk as long as one stays on the path. At night, one can imagine this area is completely deserted. Now, what's also interesting is that the villa the McCanns moved to, in terms of where the apartment 5A was, well, they moved west of that to this villa, not in the easterly direction towards the Rojanegra. One final point in terms of line of sight. In the previous analysis, I emphasized the importance of sound. In 2007, the window area of apartment 5A would have been obscured by pepper trees. When I was there in 2019, they'd been cut away. But in 2007, they were still there, and this image shows just how close and overhanging the apartments behind the Ocean Club were to 5A, but also how this apartment would have been obscured, visually obscured by the trees. Nevertheless, the point still stands. You can see how the apartments, all 9 of them, were in a perfect position, poised to hear a shutter opening or closing late at night. You can also see just how exposed the area of the debunked Tanner siding is. It makes far more sense to stay behind that tree line and head in the other direction if you don't want to be seen, and then head down to the coast. Line of sight within the layout of the town is also surprisingly limited. What I mean is, it's definitely not like Manhattan, where you have these long, straight, canyon-like corridors. In Luz, there's virtually nowhere in the town where a road doesn't kink up or down or left or right after 50 or so meters. This makes it easy to be out of line of sight, even if there is a pedestrian in the area. The witnesses who saw what they saw only got a brief glimpse, and like when I walked the same route, I was surprised to suddenly see someone, but just as quickly I went around a corner, and they and I was lost from view. And now the final point, number 6, football. On my way to the simulation, I passed by more than one pub and watering hole. This was on May 3rd, the night of May 3rd, around about 9:45 at night. I was passing pubs, and what were people doing? They were inside with a television on, and they were watching football. And in a local paper, I could see that Everton were playing Burnley that night, along with a lot of other games as well. I've always wondered how important football is to this particular narrative. And there's a point during the first reenactment when Jane Tanner says to Jerry in the street,
because Kate had been moaning that you'd been gone a long time watching the football.
I'm almost certain that when I came out, I came over and he was here.
would you guys like me to deal with the potential relevance of the football narrative in more detail? If so, let me know in the comments. Thank you for listening. Make sure you catch that live stream I'll be doing on the Jennifer Dulas case, and I'll see you guys next time.